Hi, everybody. This is Laura Jakubowski, and I am glad you joined us today, Friday, November 18th, for the Nonprofit Centers Network webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about case statements, and we have a great group of speakers for you. We're going to get started here as it looks like folks are still joining in. But I just want to start with some introductions. Again, my name is Laura Jakubowski. I'm the Executive Director at the Nonprofit Centers Network here in Denver. Also on the team is Katie Edwards, our Associate Director, and Lena Waite, who's our Programs Assistant. And we want to welcome all of you who are members of NCN. You get these webinars free as a member benefit. We also want to remind you about the online resource center that's always available to you, as well as discounts on events and publications. And every year you get 1 free hour of consulting. So please be in touch and let us know how we can support your work. If you aren't a member, please consider joining. We are only as strong as our network, so love to talk to you more about membership. I did want to just, before we get started, let you know that we have some events that will be coming up in February. We will be doing our boot camp and our Energize trainings in San Francisco and Oakland. So be on the lookout. We'll be sending out more information about that. And we've just decided that we are going to also do a Southeastern regional training at the end of April. We're looking at April 26th and 27th, and that will be in Atlanta. So we hope that you will consider coming to one of our in-person events, which is always a great opportunity to meet your peers and learn about the latest and greatest stuff that's going on at the Nonprofit Centers Network. So for today, those of you who have been on our webinars before, this will be old hat. We'll be taking questions by having you write into the box on the right. We'll be answering all questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to be typing in your questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll be reading them to the speakers at the end. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. And then I just wanted to introduce our panelists. We got started with this idea around case statements, actually dating back to a previous webinar that one of our panelists, Mina Gamepal Singh, did for us. And we know that this is always an area that folks are really interested in, and we thought it would be really valuable to drill down on case statements. So we are really excited to have Mina join us again today. For those of you who weren't able to join us last year, Mina is a fundraising professional and consultant specializing in strategy, individual giving, capital campaigns, grant writing, prospect research, and event management. She has worked in the sector for over 17 years, initially at the Medical Foundation for the Care of Victims of Torture, where she worked on a capital campaign to build a new treatment center for torture survivors. Mina has worked as a consultant for many organizations, including WaterAid Canada, Starlight Children's Foundation, and Virgin Unite. Mina has delivered training internationally on strategy, major gifts, board engagement and development, international fundraising, relationship development, and grant writing at a number of venues, and also runs the award-winning First Fridays seminar series in Ottawa. She also chairs Ottawa's Fundraising Day, an annual conference for the fundraising community. We love working with her because she's so dedicated to supporting the professional development of fundraisers. She enjoys helping charities navigate their way through various fundraising challenges, and all of us who work with shared spaces know that we can always use some more ideas about how to do fundraising. And then we're also joined by two folks from Al Siegel, which has a very successful and long history of doing capital campaigns and fundraising for their shared space. First, we'll hear from Tom O'Connor. He's the president of the Al Siegel Community of Agencies, a unique community collaborative network of independent human service agencies passionately working together to take the dis out of disabilities and build inclusion for tens of thousands of people and families in and around Rochester, New York. Tom joined Al Siegel in 2008, where he led a rebranding initiative as part of a corporate restructure and oversaw and directed real estate and facilities management functions for over 650,000 square feet of rental property as the vice president of operations. Prior to Al Siegel, Tom held a wide array of sales, marketing, and operations roles with Gannett Newspapers over a span of 17 years. He was also co-owner of CPO Productions, a video audio recording studio. And he is joined by Debbie Salmon, whose career in advancement began in 1979 following her graduation from St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York, when she became an executive with the local council of the Boy Scouts of America. She later served as regional director for alumni programs with the University of Rochester, director of development of Holy Childhood and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester. Salmon first joined Al Siegel Community in 1991 and served as director of development during her 10-year tenure. Wow. She returned to Al Siegel Community of Agencies in 2015 and today serves as vice president of the Al Siegel Foundation, which raises, manages, and distributes funds to foster the goals of the Al Siegel Community of Agencies, its collaborative member agencies, and the tens of thousands of children and adults with disabilities and special needs who are served by those agencies. So we're very lucky to have all of you with us, and with that, I'm going to turn this over to Minna. And Minna, yeah, it sounds like you're there, so you can take it away.
I am, yes. Great. Well, thank you so much, Laura. That was a lovely introduction, and I'm thrilled to be on this webinar with Tom and Debbie as well, because I think they just have so much to bring to this and experience that I think is going to be hugely valuable to everyone listening. So thank you for sharing this space with me. So I am going to talk with you today just to give some overview to start off with about the case for support. Oh, it's working. Sorry, it was a bit sticky. So what some of the things I'm going to focus on today is really about how the case for support can be a really valuable tool. And I've said on this slide how the case for support can be a journey and it's not just a destination, and that there's so much you can learn from the process that you go through of creating a case for support. And just a couple of those there, it can really help you to understand what makes your donors tick, what inspires them, what persuades them to support your organization. But through that process, you can also figure out what some of your strongest and most compelling messaging is by speaking with your donors as part of the process of creating your document. And I'll explain a bit more of that as we go through. So what is a case for support? We often hear it in two ways. We hear of it as a document, a final document, but also people use it as just the concept. Often we have donors will say to us, what is your case for support? And what they typically mean by that is that, why should I fund you? What it is about your organization that means that you need my funding or my support. So you may hear it in two ways. I'm focusing more on the document today, which is which articulates what your funding need is and helps donors to know and appreciate why they should support you. And I'll go into more detail about what that might include a bit later on. I say that it touches the head and the heart, and we often hear in fundraising how important it is that we persuade people to get involved because they feel passionate and they feel moved by your work, and that's absolutely correct. It's what's going to get people to listen to you in the first place. But it also has to have logical sense. And I've had experiences with clients in the past where they clearly have a need and they're very passionate, and there is a clear project there, but sometimes things don't quite make sense in how they're going to go about it, and this is where a donor can get stuck and think, okay, I come back to me when you figure out some of your logic, because this isn't quite making sense to me. So when I say it touches the head and the heart, it has to have sense, but absolutely it has to be emotive and move people to want to get more involved. So as such, it's intended to persuade people. It's not there to educate. And this is a mistake I've often seen with organizations where they think the case for support is to tell everybody or tell their donors everything there is to know about their organization and about their project and how they go about it, and really the nuts and bolts of everything they do. And that's not what the case for support is about. It is there as a fundraising document. It is to persuade people to get involved, so it doesn't need to include all of that information because that can often distract from the emotive language that you need to include that's going to persuade people to want to get more involved. So that means it's all about impact rather than about the process. So people want to see the impact you have in their communities. They want to know about the difference that you make, and they want to know that passionately. They want to see that passion. We often know that passion is very infectious. So if you're passionate and your language is passionate, it's very hard to turn that away and turn away from that as a donor. It also has a clear call to action. This is a fundraising document, as I've said. So it isn't just to help people to know more about your work. It has to have a clear ask of whatever that might be. Typically, in a case for support, it is about money, but sometimes you might have something that is about persuading people to get involved in other ways. So case for support can be used as that direct fundraising, raising money document, but it can be used in other forms as well. But the call to action does have to be very clear, so people know exactly what you're asking of them. And I have spoken with donors who felt that frustration when they are moved, they are engaged, but they're never asked for anything. So having that call to action helps your donor to know and understand what their role is in supporting the organization. One question I often ask when trying to figure out what is to discover that real need for your organization is to ask that question, what if you didn't exist? And make sure your case for support answers that question. So who would suffer as a result of you not being there? What would be the impact? What would be the result of your organization, your project not actually coming to fruition or going away? So if you're able to ask that question and answer it in your case for support, that can help define that really passionate and emotive language that you might need to include in your document. So we're talking about non-profit centres today. So these are often shared spaces that provide a space for other organisations, and that does present some fundraising challenges. Rarely do these organisations, and in my experience I've worked with a number of them, are they providing direct services. They're mostly there to support other organisations so that they can thrive. You often see this too with, say, membership organisations, so where they have other organisations as their members, and they too have that similar situation where being able to demonstrate that they are having an impact can be much more tricky. You are a little bit more removed from where the direct impact is happening in many cases. So that does create some fundraising challenges, as donors typically like to fund those sorts of direct services. They like to see exactly where the magic happens, you could say. Another issue is around conflict of interest with their members or their tenants, who are fundraising organisations who may be concerned that you're going after the same pots of money within the community. And I know that Debbie and Tom have some great systems and procedures in place to help overcome this, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. The other issue that I've seen with shared spaces is whether you're a cause or a business. And I've gone to donors with a case for support, and they've struggled sometimes to see that you are actually a cause, because they are very aware that you are renting out space, so they may see you more as a landlord, or that you're charging a fee for service, so they may assume that your money is raised through those means and that additional money is not required, or they're struggling to see your role in terms of how you're changing your communities. And I know we have some Canadian organisations on the line today, but the other thing to think about, many of the non-profit spaces in Canada are they're non-profits. So they're more restricted compared with registered charities about what they can do in terms of their fundraising. So that can affect some of the fundraising you can do. So, for example, it can be harder to raise funds from foundations, and you can't issue tax receipts to individual donors. So that's that's another challenge that some organizations might experience. So how do you overcome some of those challenges as a nonprofit center? Well, there are some really wonderful facets to nonprofit spaces that some of their tenants may not have, and it's a way of describing or explaining to some of your donors how different you can be and your different approach and the real benefit that you can provide to the community. It is more, in many cases, than just offering shared resources, which of course does bring costs down for many and can support collaboration. But the other thing that you can do as a nonprofit centre is have a more holistic approach to a particular issue, particularly if your centre is focused around a particular issue or theme. So, for example, disability, where you are bringing people together, but also can give you that opportunity to have a broader or a different perspective on that issue, since you have many viewpoints that you're bringing into the conversation. That can be very attractive to some donors who are looking to have a bigger impact or have a different impact on an issue, rather than dealing with the smaller pieces of what might cause some sort of barriers to the people that you support. You can perhaps find a more holistic approach or answer to some of the issues. Another key is having a very transformational vision. So what I mean by this is many organizations are vision driven, and a vision is typically an aspirational goal. So where you're striving towards a world that you want to see, and you are working towards that every day through all of your work. Once that vision is achieved, and it may never be achieved, as I say, they're typically aspirational. So, for example, ending poverty might be an aspirational vision, but if you're driving towards that, driving towards goals that your donors feel passionate about, that can change the world, that can help people to really appreciate the work that you're doing through yourselves and by bringing your members together. As I say, you can offer some added value as a nonprofit centre that organisations may not have by themselves. I once worked with an organisation that their focus was on sexual violence, and what they were doing was working at more of an advocacy level, because all of their members were focused on providing the support to people who experience sexual violence, and they did not have the time or resources to actually tackle things at a more an infrastructure or a policy level. So they are able to add a value as almost like having some oversight about all the different experiences that a member experienced, that has real value to all of their members, but also to the community as a whole. But also having an outcomes approach. That's an important thing around doing this kind of fundraising, where you are demonstrating that you have a measurable result, that you are working towards goals that you can measure and say, we are actually changing things, we are changing attitudes, we are, for example, increasing literacy, or whatever it might be you're doing. You can say that you've moved the needle on some certain things, rather than just focusing on the services themselves. You're focusing on the outcomes that those services create. The other thing is thinking about the audience. There's two aspects to this that come to my mind, and that is the audience that you support, but also your donors. What do they need from you? And making sure that in your case for support, you can demonstrate that you are meeting your audience's needs, both the needs of your donors by giving them the information that they're really looking for, but also your beneficiaries by changing the situation if that needs to be changed. Excuse me. So I've mentioned that the case for support is a tool. It can be hugely valuable in your journey and through your work as a fundraiser. It can be a way of engaging donors during its creation, and I'll talk a bit about testing your case for support shortly. But when you're creating your document, it can be a great idea to test it by putting a draft version in front of some of your donors, so that you can have a really meaningful conversation, help them to feel more involved, but also to get their feedback so that you can create a much stronger appeal to your donors by really adopting some of the ideas that they may give you. But as I say, by involving them, it's a way of having a conversation, learning more about what your donors care about, what makes them tick, and what's not working with them. It can also help to identify some gaps in your logic. Often when I've tested a case for support, there's things that people don't understand or don't appreciate, and it's because we haven't explained things very well. So by doing that testing process and by going through that by using your case for support, you can identify where you really need to plug some gaps. Sometimes it could be things like you're not doing strong enough monitoring and evaluation to prove the need for your work. So you know that there's a piece of work that you have to do there and then demonstrate to your donors. It can help to give you that language, so when people are using it as they go out to speak with others and championing your cause, they have that perfect language to help talk about the organization. But sometimes that language might come from your donors. I've had situations where I've tested the case for support with them, and the way that they talk about the organization is better than the way that we are. So that can be really valuable language that you can capture and use in the development of all your fundraising resources. So that, again, that process can help you develop that great language that you can use to really motivate donors. Having everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, and what I mean by that is that everybody is giving out the same message and that there's no disconnect between how different people are talking about your organization or your project. Misunderstandings can easily happen when you're talking about your work, particularly if the work is relatively complex. But you want people to be coming out with the same kind of messaging so that if different people are talking to the same donors, they're not confused about what you're about and what you're trying to achieve. One massive benefit of your case for support is how it can build confidence. And many of us experience issues with our boards of directors, who we say they're not getting enough involved, they're getting involved enough with fundraising. They keep saying they're going to do more, but then they don't do it. And I discovered over the years that a lot of times the reason why that happens is because people don't know how to talk about the organization. They don't know the work well enough, even though they feel that they should because they're on the board. But it can be very easy to become distant and removed from the actual work that you do and get more bogged down in the governance. But what I find is when you give people a case for support, you see the light bulbs go on and the confidence rise because they have a way of talking about your organization. It can be an amazing tool for that, from that perspective. But it can help you understand who your donors are. When you create your case for support, think about who would be most affected by this, who would care most about this, and that can help you discover who your prospects are and think about whether the way that the direction of your organization is going in through the creation of this case for support, is it where your donors are right now? Do they care about this? Is this where what matters most to our donors? Because it can help you figure those things out as well. So what if you don't have the answers to all these questions? Well, do some research. Speak to your donors, and I've talked about testing the case for support. And I find this extremely valuable. Whenever you're creating a case for support, find a group of people that you know and trust to give you very honest answers, but also people who are those that are likely to commit funding to your organization, because they are going to give you the right responses in the sense that they're going to think about the fact that, would I give money to this based upon what I'm reading? So if you can put in place a confidential consultation process with those donors, and I say confidential because they need to feel they can be honest with you, and sometimes it can be useful to find an external person to do that for you, but it can help you discover what people like and don't like about your messaging, whether they're making assumptions about your work or whether they have any preconceptions about your work that aren't correct. And whether they're coming up with ideas and ways that you could be engaging your donors that you've not thought of. So that process can really help you to know and understand how you can improve your fundraising program, but also your messaging, and identify where there may be some barriers to engagement. As I said, it can also give you some ideas about the language that people are using to talk about your organization. Essentially, it helps you to understand whether you're all on the same page and that you're all moving in the same direction, because if you're not, there may be some work that has to be done to bring you all together. So I know I only have a few more minutes left, so I'm just going to quickly go through this piece where I'm going to say about it has to be appropriate for your audience. So who are you presenting your case for support to? Does it fit with their interest? Does it fit with their giving level? Often we talk about giving levels in the case for support, but if you're presenting something that is pretty expensive to a group that are unable to reach that kind of giving, then it won't be appropriate for our audience, and it could put them off. And it could work the other way around. I've had experiences where we've gone to people who give at much higher levels and they felt that our project was too small fry for them. So it's just something to bear in mind, that you make sure your case for support fits with your audience. It should be based on really knowing who that audience is. So I've mentioned about research, so basing your case for support on that research can be a really good idea. I talked about how it should be based upon a powerful vision that people can see, okay, I know where you're going with this. This is really exciting, and I want to help you get there. And it should be written to achieve results, and this is about that call to action. You are looking to achieve a goal. You're not just looking to inform and educate. You have a goal in mind with regard to this case for support, and you need to be clear on what that goal is, so that your writing heads in that direction and makes it clear to the reader that you know what you're looking to achieve through this. I mentioned about touching the head and the heart, but the other thing I wanted to say is about linking solution to impact. Sometimes what I see is people talk about a need, then they talk about a solution, but they haven't made the link between the two really clear. So I couldn't see, for example, if I was a donor, how your project is solving that problem that you've identified. So there's quite a long list of what a case for support might include, and I'll leave that to yourselves to go through, because hopefully most of it is pretty self-explanatory. But I've just picked on a few things that are the bits in bold. About being unique, this is something that organizations will often talk about how unique they are, but it has to matter. It has to be a uniqueness that actually makes a difference. So sometimes it doesn't make a difference, and being the only, I'll just use a really blunt example, you're the only organization that has a red door. That really doesn't necessarily matter whether you have a blue door or a red door, but demonstrating how your uniqueness creates a better result can be very powerful in your case for support. There has to be a reason why your uniqueness has some power to that document. Why you and right now? Why now? Why are you the best organization to do this? Why not another organization that might be delivering similar services? Why not just a for-profit landlord, for example? Why can't they just use this as their business model? So think about how you can demonstrate why you are the best organization to do this, why they should be supporting you right now by demonstrating that there is an urgency to your need, but also why they should choose to support you over another organization. And another thing I wanted to say is around how your program fits with your organization's overall goals. Sometimes I've seen a case for support that isn't in sync with their strategic plan, and that can create a host of problems. So just making sure that your case for support is in line with what your strategic direction is as an organization is crucial. A very quick comment about storytelling. Completing stories within your case for support is extremely valuable. It helps to create that passion and help connect people to work that you do. But having your own story arc in the case for support also makes a massive difference, because then you can take people on that journey that I talk about, where people can start with the need and then they can go through to seeing, build that swell of emotion, where they can see where they are playing a part and they can be the hero in your story. So think about your own story arc, that everything flows smoothly and that it all makes sense, and that people can go on that journey with you, and that you can make sure that you can really tap into what people really care about. So a sort of whistle-stop tour through creating a case for support. So I'm now going to hand over to the Alslegal team and to talk more about some examples of how they built their case for support.
Great. Thanks, Minna. I think your comments about the outcomes orientation is really useful, and we are sort of taking on this evaluation project that we're hoping to get more details on and out to folks soon, but hopefully that will help folks with kind of being able to kind of include that in their case for support. I understand we're having some audio problems, and I'm curious if others are having audio. If you are, if you could kind of send a note in the chat section. I think this might just be more of an audio issue for specific participants. So anyway, we are going to move on to Tom and Debbie. Tom, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Laura.
Okay, great. I am giving you control of the slides, so take it away.
Be careful what you wish for. I want to thank you, Laura, and thank you, Katie and Lena, all the staff at NCN. We are a member of NCN. I find tremendous value in being involved in this organization, and I like to wow our board members by telling them that's an international organization, and following MENA with that terrific accent makes me realize that you are, in fact, more than international. I want to talk about, MENA mentioned storytelling, and I want to tell the story of Al Siegel, Community of Agencies. We were really, I'm going to see if I can advance the slide here. All right. A little technical issue on this side.
If you want to click on the slide first, that might help.
Yeah, I've tried that, Laura. Let's see if we can...
I can always advance them for you if there's a problem. Oh, here, wait, let me try something on my end.
Okay.
All right, try it now. There you go.
There we go.
Sorry.
All right. So Meta had mentioned having a vision and maybe it's an aspirational vision. In our case, it's achieving more together. Al Siegel Community of Agencies, as you can see, we're a collaborative community network. We do provide cost-effective real estate. It's below market rate. We provide business services such as IT and telephone, and we also provide philanthropic support through our foundation to a growing array of independent human service agencies that serve children and adults with disabilities and special needs. We were really an innovative model. We came together, there we go, in 1962. There were 7 agencies that came together and saw potential in that collaboration. I want to stress for folks who are out there in the planning stages, or if you're in the middle of the development, this came together as a result of families who saw opportunity and potential in this. But the center itself the first center didn't open until 1968. So patience is a requirement. And as we start to talk about case for support and capital campaigns, that will also test your patience. You're going to need more. But stick to the idea, stick to the passion and pursuit. We were the first center opened in 1968. It was the first fully accessible facility with a gymnasium, 2 therapy pools, and a cafeteria in our community. We have since grown as our agency's needs have grown. We've expanded to 6 campuses. We have 20 buildings, 650,000 square feet of space. We do call it social purpose real estate. And we have a number of shared business services and philanthropic support that we provide as well. We have agency membership. So we actually have folks that we fundraise and market together with. We call these member agencies. And I won't go through the full list here, but you can see there's a wide array of different organizations providing different types of services. We have affiliates as well for information purposes. Some of these are pretty straightforward in terms of Hearing and Speech Center, but Mary Cariola Children's Center, for instance, is a school for children with developmental disabilities and autism. We have joint ventures, Center Information Services, this is our IT department. Future Care Planning is just what it sounds like. It's a joint venture that we formed to help families who are trying to take care of a loved one when they may no longer be here to do it in person. And then we have neighbors that we have over 17 different independent organizations that reside in our home, different campuses as well. And these range from Girl Scouts of Western New York to an organization that supports teens with cancer. It's my pleasure. I'm going to hand it off for a couple of minutes to Deb Salmon, who's our Vice President of the Foundation, responsible for actually putting these case statements and studies to work and actually raising the money with me. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb.
Thank you, Tom. Al Siegel is currently in the Celebrating Abilities campaign. This is our 5th capital campaign, with the first one being held in 1966. Whose first case statement included introducing the concept of bringing 7 agencies together, sharing accessible facilities, and working together with a novel concept. Today, our case is really about change for our current 6 member agencies. We've gone through a planning phase, surveyed all of our member agencies, and came up with $40 million in diverse needs for a capital campaign. Well, can you do that? Well, we retained an external consultant to help do a feasibility and external market study. That figure was brought down to $20 million with a stretch goal of $25 million. You talk about telling the story. From the key findings we had from the feasibility study, it was focused on funding priorities. and the case must be inclusive and build engagement for not only member agencies but for the community, and must connect projects to a larger vision for our agency. It's really about what the future looks like for Al Siegel community and that commitment to inclusion. So how do we lay the groundwork? Based on those findings, the $40 million was refined, as I mentioned, to $20 million goal and $25 million stretch goal that has subsequently been raised to a $26.5 million stretch goal. There were priority areas that were determined in the space modernization and renovation, providing for new spaces and equipment to provide innovative services, investing in technology, and really ensuring the sustainability for our collaboration and ability to serve people in the future through the endowment program. How do we build engagement? We have 6 member agencies. Well, we revisited with the member agency goals with each of the member agency presidents and the respective leadership. A case for support was created as a living document. It's a fluid document. We started doing this in 2011, and now it's 2016. Some changes have been made in the course of that, but so it's a living, fluid document. It's about the collaboration and those countless stories, and really putting together a volunteer leadership with honorary co-chairs, working co-chairs, cabinet committee members, which include representation for each of our member agencies, and recruited family division co-chairs. Those included members from our board of trustees, our foundation team, as well as past chairs of our Al Siegel community of agencies. Within the course of the case statements, we provided one case statement for the overall organization, but subsequently for each one of the member agencies, another one was made, addressing their particular needs. There were 3 categories for each of them: facilities, technology, and endowments. And then we were able to bring the different notes or projects for each one of the member agencies under one of those categories. So the universal message that can be broken out and provided to donors based on their needs and interests, being donor-centric. The family, as I mentioned, included lots of other membership, and we solicited a lot of leadership level gifts from individual and private foundations during this quiet phase. And during that time, we received the largest gift in our agency history, both from an endowment piece, a bequest, as well as a private donation. That's been pretty amazing for all of us and something to celebrate.
A few things that I think we can pass on that we learned as we were building the case statement and also working through this. You need to have an agreement up front. I know that sounds pretty straightforward, but when you start to talk about money, you realize really quickly that people get sensitive to it if they don't understand how it's going to be playing out. So it's key to put that in a formal document, whether it's just even a memo of understanding, but there has to be a formal document that everyone agrees to in terms of how you're going to approach donors, what you're going to do with the dollars raised, what the priority areas are, and how that's going to be distributed. In our case, we have 7 different agencies who are all benefiting from donor response, so we need to make sure that people understand where those responses came from and how we're doing with it. That's the reporting format. That's the really key piece in terms of being able to explain to folks where dollars arrived from, whether or not they were designated, restricted, or unrestricted in some sense, and then making sure that we have a mechanism, if you will, to not only report back to the agency leaders, but also to their boards as well. And we do that on a quarterly basis. We're looking for 100% commitment. You know, this is Mena had mentioned. You have to have an aspirational vision, and everybody speaking the same language, but you also have to have people that are committed to this. And you'd be really surprised at the number of people who will respond when they hear the story from someone that they know. And I think Mena also mentioned it's really important to be able to have that story be the same from all the constituents, and you'd be pleasantly surprised to see people's response. But this is really largely storytelling. And the next piece is trust. That may be the key element in everything that we do on a daily basis, but you have to be fully transparent. From the very beginning, you have to have clear expectations about who's doing what and who's responsible for what goals and objectives, and making sure that everyone is clear about what you plan or intend to do with the funds as they come in.
And what did we learn from the community from this effort? Found success was equal to having the top volunteer leadership. We're very fortunate to have people in leadership positions that are multi-generational families involved with the Al Siegel community of agencies. We all know that donors are people, and it's all about those relationships. We've been very grateful to have wonderful relationships established with the community for so many years, since we have gone back to them on 6 different occasions. It's all about that relationship and working with them throughout the years before you go into a campaign. We do think, all stronger than some, we can achieve more together than we can alone. And more is more. Today, more than ever, people are loving and rewarding the collaboration and efficient solutions. We can't do business as usual. And how do we provide those spaces that provide for folks to be more engaged in the community going forward? As of today, we've raised $23.5 million, and we're eagerly looking forward to concluding our campaign and celebrating on March 31st of 2017. As far as the, so see, there's some examples of what we've been working on to tell that story. The conference center I'm really proud about, because that is made possible by one of our long-standing volunteer committees, the Al Siegel Sports Committee, which I've had the great honor of working with for many years. This is a group of people who are committed to contributing $500,000 to support the conversion of a warm water therapy pool to a multi-use conference center. We were just meeting in that conference center this morning as our staff. We've had committee meetings, we had board meetings, we had agencies participate in this particular space. They really felt committed to make wonderful spaces possible to support all of our member agencies. And we're really grateful to a wonderful volunteer committee of men and women who make that possible through golf tournaments, tennis tournaments, and wine events.
And I like to stress, because some people wonder, why would you convert? We converted a warm water therapy pool to a multi-use conference center, and it was simply because the warm water therapy pool needed significant improvements that didn't make a lot of sense to make. We had a second one in the building, and it didn't see the use that we really expected it to over the years. So we saw the redundancy and said, look, we were talking about efficiency, we talked about how we can do things differently. This is a prime example of us actually putting our money where our mouth is. One of the other projects that we've done as a result of support from the community, we've built a connectivity cafe. This used to be a 1960s era school lunchroom. It appeared very institutional. Wasn't really a very welcoming environment for most of the folks who visited there. But what we've done is created multi-purpose collaborative space that's now an attractive destination on the campus. And I like to think that these pictures, if it illustrates anything at all, we try not to do it before and after. We try to show the work being done as we're doing it. And I purposely left the cafe empty because from the standpoint of being able to give aspirational vision, I like to show it full after we've started to put the money to work. But I don't want to show that beforehand. We need people to understand that the storytelling and all that will take place as a result of their support. And then we made common area improvements as well. So we wanted to create areas that were more inclusive, more welcoming spaces for us. We've got breakout areas. We've got Wi-Fi throughout the building. These are, and I should have stated up front, this building being opened in 1968 had an institutional feel that was appropriate for 1968, but it didn't feel like it should in 2016. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is soften the appearances, make it more welcoming, more inviting, and we've converted everything in terms of energy efficiency and more green technologies, LED lighting, new flooring, new surfaces, new roofing, solar panels, all those types of things as well in terms of sustainability. And then the last piece is really to show you some of the pieces that we're still pulling together. We've got entranceways that we're working on. As Deb mentioned, we're at $23.5 million on a $25 million campaign, so we've got a little bit left to do. But from our standpoint, we've got a terrific story to continue to tell, and we're going to wrap that up here in the next 3 to 4 months. And if you guys know anybody out there who's looking to make a difference or an impact for social purpose real estate in Rochester, New York, we'd love to talk to them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom and Deb. That was great, and I think we all owe a great debt to Al Siegel, who was really the father, mother of all shared spaces throughout the U.S. and Canada. We don't have a lot of examples that date as far back as the early 60s, so we always love to hear the stories and just appreciate, how amazing it was at that time to, you know, I mean, we feel like sometimes we have a hard time having these conversations about sharing space now. I can only imagine how forward-thinking you all were back in the early 60s. So thanks for all the work that you do. We have a couple questions, and maybe I will start with one for Tom and Deb. This question has to do with how do you keep your case statement fresh? I guess it really does speak to the fact that you all have been doing so many of these campaigns. Do you have anything to offer on that?
Sure. You know, as Deb mentioned, this is really, it's a fluid document, and even when we first sat down and started to talk about what the needs were, you know, this was 3 or 4 years ago, the capital campaign, as we were doing the planning. Those needs have changed. So it's really about communication, and communication could be as simple as, I got a phone call this morning from one of our agency leaders who needs to replace a vehicle. So as you know, now that may sound like not a big deal. I think it's a big deal. But he said, you know, I'm looking to replace a bus. It's probably in the neighborhood of $75,000. Can I still take a look at what I've got left on this capital campaign and make a case for what this bus will do and the service it'll provide? So it's really about having open dialogue with the folks that you're involved in terms of the case, and being able to make those changes, whether it's on websites, social media, the document itself, and who you're talking to in terms of the donors. I've always said, consider your audience. That's the key piece of this, and can you find people whose passions align with some of the things that you're looking for support for.
Great. And then another question I think appropriate for Tom and Deb, well, specifically asking about how you allocate funds among your members. And the question was, you mentioned 3 categories, and they're asking, was it facilities, technology, and endowment? Or could you clarify that and exactly how you go through that process?
Yes, when the campaign statements were done, the categories were facilities, technology, and endowments. And every one of the member agencies has an endowment capacity because we want to provide for the future and sustainability of each of our member agencies as well as the center itself. Technology was a piece we went through and identified key areas. The biggest one for each has been facilities, because that's the individual with 6 campuses in different spaces. We have to provide to meet the needs and updating for all those areas too. It might be a classroom renovation, maybe a particular facility for a member agency that they have that's unique to them. Some lift-free environments, providing for some program opportunities and residential development pieces too. But they all fit within one of those categories. An upfront agreement was done, as Tom mentioned, and we talk about who's the most appropriate person. If there's one donor that has supported all 3 organizations, we work together and present a proposal with all the information to that donor. And it's donor-centric. Let the donor decide who is the most appropriate person to donate to, or do I do it to the center with agreement that it would go to all agencies?
And I'd add one thing to that as well, and that is, keep in mind that as you look at buildings, and particularly if the buildings have age on them, you know, there's always maintenance, there's always infrastructure things that need to be put into consideration. The stories are really about what happens in the space. It's not about the building or the boilers or the chilling towers and those kinds of things. It's what happens in the space. And those programs and those services change. So you want to make sure that you're current in terms of what kind of services are being offered by folks in your buildings.
Right. And I just have a question myself just about how does that process work when, I mean, is that sort of a negotiation process when you're developing all of these policies among all the agencies? I mean, you know, I think a lot of shared spaces really grapple with, you know, how to even manage that group dynamic. Or have you guys sort of set up like the way that you do this over the years and there's not a lot of additional negotiation that goes on?
Sorry, we're both laughing.
It's negotiated constantly, and there's always somebody jockeying for position. But I will say we meet monthly. Our agency leaders meet monthly, and we talk about different things that are relative to space, relative to things that we're planning strategically. So you know, it's not as though folks don't know what the other party's interests are. And in some cases, it ends up being, you know, there has to be some concessions made. You know, we would love to raise $40 million, and that would have, that really would have put us on a fast path to a number of improvements in a lot of areas. The community simply, we don't think, could support that much. So that had all of us have to pause and say, okay, reprioritize, and what are the things that you find most important? What do you really need? And let's build the case for those things. And so it is a constantly changing document. It's a constantly changing process in terms of the ask and what you're asking the community to support. And I think the big thing is that you have to be transparent. You have to have those levels of trust that everybody understands, what you're trying to do collectively.
In addition, you really have to have that framework up front, and each one of the member agencies has a signed agreement for this Celebrating Abilities campaign. I'm talking about how the allocation is going to take place, the prospect evaluation, how you distribute the proceeds and the financial reporting, what happens if there's a shortfall. All those things, but each one of the member agencies, along with the board leadership, trustees of each of the member agencies, and the agency directors have all signed an agreement to that effect as well.
That's great. Well, terrific. Let me just address a couple questions that have been coming in about whether the slides will be shared. We will be sending out the slides to everyone who's registered, and we will have a link to the audio recording that will be available in the next week or so. Be confident that you will get copies of all the slides. Minna, we have some questions for you. Who would be the appropriate person to provide that confidential consultation? And there's actually another question related to that, like what if you don't have a lot of, like what if you're a new project that's starting up, like if you don't have sort of the likely suspects, who would you go to for that? It's sort of a two-part question.
So the first one, typically is similar to what Tom and Deb were saying about a feasibility study done by a consultant. It's a very similar thing. You typically use a consultant because they are external to your organisation. But if that isn't a budget, that's a budget issue, then I would find somebody who may be able to volunteer their time, who's going to have a really good knowledge and understanding of how to have those conversations with your donors. It's having someone who's internal to your organisation in some way is just problematic, because you just may not get the answers and the real honest answers that you need to have. So yeah, I mean, pretty much every time I've seen this happen, when that consultation's happened, it's been with someone who's external. So typically a consultant who knows what they're looking for and knows how to ask the right questions, and then not just to ask a set of questions, but to feed off what people are saying and to prompt more response as well. And for the second question, sorry, can you repeat the second question again?
Well, so what if you have a startup organization, if it's an effort that's just getting started, they might not have the resources to hire someone, and they don't really have a donor base. Like, who would you recommend they approach for that role?
To test the case for support, or to play the role of what I'm suggesting as a consultant?
To test the case for support.
So the people to test with, if you don't have a pool of donors, then you have to start with who you know, and then always ask the people that you're speaking with if they know other people that you should be having this conversation with. It's much easier if you can get an introduction. I have done it with people who are cold, so for example, foundations, who are open to a certain degree to maybe having a conversation. I've done that occasionally, but it's not an easy thing to do if they don't know you very well. So when I have a very small pool to start with, I always ask the question, who else should I be talking with about this project? And it's based upon the questions I've asked already, and they know it's about fundraising, they know it's about who can support this kind of work. So they have a sense already about the kind of people we're looking for. We ask for those recommendations off the handful of people that you already know.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. Another question for you. Do you have advice for Canadian nonprofit projects that are not charitable and are trying to attract support without the advantage of providing a tax receipt?
Well, it's an interesting one. It's one that keeps coming back. I do know organisations, they're non-profits, that do raise money from individuals. They're just very, very clear about the need, and the people are passionate about the work, and that's the reason why they're giving. I think it's an assumption that people make, is that the reason why people give is the tax receipt. For some, it can be a barrier, but it doesn't have to be. There are ways that you can get around it. You have to do it very carefully, and that is working with working with a charitable organisation. And I'm going to stress here, I'm not a legal advisor, so please don't consider this to be legal advice. But work with another organisation that could accept those donations on behalf, and where they would be contracting out to you to deliver those programs. But definitely seek legal advice if you're going to come into those kinds of agreements.
Okay.
So that's a way that you can get around it, and a lot of organisations do, but you have to be very careful how you go about setting those agreements up to make sure that you're on side with the Canada Revenue Agency, and that you're not breaching any rules and regulations.
Right. Okay, great. And this is a question for both Tom and Deb and Minna. Any tips for how to make the case to raise money for collaborative programs for shared space? For example, collaborative working groups or workshops for members. So this is not just for facility or infrastructure capital costs. Tom, do you have any, maybe I'll start with Tom and Deb if you have any suggestions on that.
Yep. It's not really all that different from the facility standpoint. We've got a couple of different programs that are joint venture programs or collaborative programs. We've got a sports and recreation program that needs to be funded by donor support. So what we do with that is we build smaller, I don't want to call them case statements because we really relate that to the capital campaigns, but we'll build a one sheet, and we'll just say, these are some of the different things that happen as a result of this recreation program, whether it's adaptive skiing at a downhill ski center nearby, whitewater kayaking and rafting, different things that are getting people out and having an opportunity to be included in their community and with their friends and family. It starts really with just a small audience of folks that are passionate about inclusion or passionate about what it is that you're trying to raise awareness for. And then it's really, I invite people to come see it and participate themselves, because for us, once people get involved that way, it makes it a lot easier, and then you have disciples that will run out and help you too.
And as we said before, it's all about the collaboration. If you have 3 different organizations telling the story out in the community, you can get that much more awareness and support for the programs.
So it's an interesting point, and I guess I just want to nuance this a little bit, and Minna, maybe you can follow this up. This is probably our last question, but the beauty I think that Tom and Deb have is that they have a lot of direct service provision that goes on. And I guess my question for you, Minna, adding on to this is, if you're looking to raise money for collaborative programs, what if it's not like a direct service? Like, what if it really is around that programming to bring organizations together, and they might not be direct service providers, so you don't have that story to tell about, folks being able to get on the slopes or things like that?
Yeah. I know what you mean. I've raised funds for projects that are collaborative that way. I think what you've really got to demonstrate is that more can happen with the collaboration than can happen that can't. Basically, you're demonstrating that without the collaboration, certain things wouldn't happen, and you have to focus on that. And it's a bit like what Deb was saying around better together. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about making it sound nice, because I know that I know many collaborative projects, they don't do that. They just say collaboration has to be driven, and it's not just about having lots of people in the same space that collaboration happens, but with collaborative projects, it is demonstrating that certain activities and actions can happen, and results can be achieved through collaboration that wouldn't be achieved without it. So that is, I think, the real crux of the argument, is that what is the difference between a collaborative project and not having one, as opposed to just being, it's nice that everyone's working together. Right.
No, I think that's great, and I loved your point about, what would it be if you didn't exist? And so I think, this question around support for the programs and the collaborative programs, like, what would the world look like if you couldn't do that collaboration and maybe working your way backward from that? So that's terrific.
Yeah, exactly it.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap this up. I just want to let folks know about our upcoming webinar in January, Making Connections, Network Evaluation for Shared Space. We'll be joined by Ann Watley from Network Impact. And this is going to talk, Ann is going to talk about measuring the effectiveness of networks. And I think this is a really exciting topic for all of our centers, since you are, managing a network basically within your center. So this will help you evaluate the work that you're doing, and we'll get into how to apply network evaluation techniques to shared space. And we're really excited that to have Ann, because she is a pioneer in this area, and I think it'll be a really exciting conversation. So we want to thank Tom and Deb and Minna for a great webinar today. For those of you in Canada, I know you've already had Thanksgiving. Americans will be having Thanksgiving next week, so best wishes to all of you, and thank you again to our presenters for a great hour. And as always, we love to hear from our audience on topics that they'd like to hear in the future, so please be in touch. And otherwise, have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.